Well, good morning, y'all. My thanks to the musicians who came and worked today. I don't know about you, but I needed that this morning, so that was awesome. But what a difference a week makes, huh? I don't know about you, but it's been a pretty weird week for me. I'm sure it is for all of us. I was traveling this last week. I was down in Austin and Houston, and I was in the downtown centers that would normally have, they had South by Southwest in Austin and the rodeo in Houston. All that was canceled, and places were like ghost towns, and it was a little eerie feeling as I walked through an almost empty airport on my way home. It was almost like apocalyptic. These are some weird times, and I think that it's going to be very challenging for us to navigate here in the near future. And when you think about it, why is it that everyone is so freaked out about this virus? And I think, as I was thinking about it, it's a few things, right? It forces us to for sure contemplate our own mortality. There's kind of this eerie feeling that's out there, and it feels like we are coming face to face with our worst fears, and it's scary. It causes us to be full of anxiety. For a lot of people, it causes panic because there's this feeling that there's this loss of control. Everything that we know has been disrupted. And then for others of us, I think, we foresee that this thing is going to put a financial strain on a lot of us, and it's going to make things very stressful. And so all of that, combined with so many other things, causes a lot of anxiety for all of us. It's just really scary to think about. And it appears that we're only in the first or second inning of this thing, so there's definitely more to come. And instead of doing the message that I had prepared for today, as Danielle said, I'm pivoting and doing a message instead entitled "The Gospel According to the Coronavirus." And as we begin to wade our way into the deep end of this crisis, I think we're all going to be facing some pretty serious challenges, and I want us all to think through ahead of time how it is that we're about to walk through what it is that we're going to walk through. And to understand that the decisions that we make as we go through this could have a lasting impact, either positively or negatively, on the way that we live our lives moving forward. Well, I have selected a passage that I think can help us to navigate during these difficult times. It's from the letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to the Colossians, chapter 3, verses 14 through 16. And Paul says, "Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. And let the peace that comes from God rule in your hearts. For as members of one body, you're called to live in peace. And always be thankful. Sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to God with thankful hearts." So from this passage, I am going to focus in on 4 choices that we will more than likely have to face at some point during the course of this pandemic. And I'm hoping that if we can remember the gospel according to the coronavirus, that we can make wise choices and go through this thing much stronger than we would. And the first choice that I think that we're going to be faced with is to choose compassion over selfishness. Verse 14 says, "Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony." I think in times of crisis, we can sometimes lose perspective and get a little self-centered and focus in on our own needs, and sometimes without even knowing it, we push aside the needs of others. A great example of this is the great toilet paper crisis of 2020. This may be even worse than the pandemic itself, but how many of you have been to the store this week desperately seeking toilet paper? Yeah, I mean, it's like a whole lot of us. Apparently, there are those people who, as soon as the crisis hit, went out to buy every little bit of toilet paper that they could get their hands on, and depriving so many of us of the good quality toilet paper during this time. And so you just kind of go, wow, you know, what were they thinking? And for me, I just couldn't help, because it was fresh on my mind, I just couldn't help but think about the passage that we read last week from the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus tells the story about the rich farmer who had this bumper crop, and he goes, well, what am I going to do with all this grain? He goes, I know I'm going to tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And then God visits him and said, hey, you're going to lose your life this very night. So I thought instead, I imagined this story to read something like this. And so as he pulls into his driveway coming home from Costco with a trunk full of toilet paper, only to find that he didn't have enough room in the linen closet to hold it all. And so he says to himself, I know what I'll do. I will tear out my linen closets and I will build bigger ones. And I will say to myself, self, you have enough toilet paper laid up for many years. Take life easy. Self-quarantine, self-distance, enjoy life best you can. I mean, it's a little funny, but it kind of raises the issue that's at hand, that a lot of times in a time of crisis, in moments like these, we tend to get into this preservationist bunker mentality where we go into survival mode and we just decide we're going to take care of me and mine, and that's all we're going to worry about, and it's a very self-centered approach to deal with crisis. And it goes against everything that Jesus teaches us when it comes to following him. There are two types of people in this world. There are givers and there are takers, and instead of walking through this crisis, grabbing everything that we can for me to make sure that me and mine are okay and safe and comfortable and secure, we instead, as Paul says, need to clothe ourselves in love, seeking to look for opportunities to enhance the life of other people who are around us, who are having equally, if not more, of a difficult time, and helping to look for opportunities to serve other people, even though we don't even know what that looks like yet. Even if it's something as simple as just sparing a square. The second choice that we will have to face is to choose faith over anxiety. In verse 15, Paul says, let the peace that comes from God rule in your hearts. So I'll just share with you a story that's very fresh. I've been working on, for the past 2 years, one of the most significant deals in my career. I spent over a year going through the city of Chicago approval process to build this kind of development in the Fulton market of Chicago. And I invested a lot of time and a whole lot of money in getting the deal done. Once it was approved by the city, I have spent the last few months going out to raise money to get the projects done. What I do in my business relies on Wall Street funds to partner with to complete the developments that I do, because they're such large developments. And in spite of a heck of a lot of obstacles, I got the fund that was my first choice to agree to partner with us. They had to go through a series of an approval process. It had passed all the hurdles on this last Monday. It had passed internal investment committee, but now it was left to this one final board approval that had to take place to make it final. And I remember joking 30 days ago when they told me that that final board approval would be set for Friday the 13th, March 13th. I said I was a little uneasy about that date being the date that my entire professional career would hinge on, and we all kind of laughed about, the superstitious part of that. But I'm telling you, there was no laughing Friday morning when I woke up at 6:30 and there was, panicked emails already in my inbox from the guys from the fund who were asking me to give them assurances that, the coronavirus was not going to affect these projects, which It's very hard to do. So we all jumped on a call by 8:30 a.m. to prepare for the barrage of questions that we knew would come from this board of directors in this investment committee later that morning. And so at the end of the call, I told the guy who was responsible for walking in that boardroom and presenting my project to the board, I said, you know, look on the bright side. You're presenting this project on Friday the 13th, the day after the biggest stock market crash since 1987, and on the very day that the President of the United States is about to declare a state of emergency for the biggest pandemic that's ever hit the earth since 1920-something. I said, this should be a cakewalk, right? Well, the entire rest of my day was a very long day on everything else of one fire after another, things that you couldn't even imagine that this thing started to impact, things that started to happen. It was like a domino effect. And I just have to tell you that if I'm honest here this morning, sitting here, I'm pretty stressed out. And I don't think that I'm alone in that, because I think there are a whole lot of us who are about to be affected by this disease. And it will be different for all of us. For some of us, it may actually be physically. For some of us, it may be emotionally. For others of us, it may be financially. We know that there's going to be an economic downturn that's coming, and so some people may actually lose their jobs. But it's going to be a pretty significant impact to all of our lives. And so we have the tendency, when we're facing situations like this, to be full of anxiety and worry about all of the what-ifs of the worst-case scenarios. But in Philippians chapter 4, it's like just this peaceful passage that the Apostle Paul also writes. And he says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. There's a really cool image, I think, of what this passage is talking about. There's a Hebrew word picture of this person who is walking through the middle of a field. And he can see in the distance that there's a storm blowing in, and so this person begins to look for shelter. But they don't know where to go because they're standing in the middle of the field. And right there in the middle there is one lone tree that is all by itself. And so that person goes and grabs a hold of that tree so tightly that they literally wrap themselves around it. And so as the winds begin to blow and the storm hits, this person remains standing there, holding firm and secure, holding on tightly to that tree. That is a picture of what it looks like to hold on to God in the face of the storms that we're about to face. It's not like, I don't think, that God wants us to walk around with a fake smile, put our head in the sand, and pretend like bad things aren't happening. I think rather it's that we can have this deep sense of unexplainable, sustaining joy, knowing that when the hard times hit, that we have something to hold on to. That we're holding on to God so tightly in those times of fear and anxiety that you know He will give you whatever it is that you need to make it through those times that you're going through. And in the midst of the chaos, there is this calm, this peace that we can't quite describe. I think the third choice that we're going to be facing is to choose humility over arrogance. In verse 15, it says, as members of one body, you are called to live in peace. And before he says, in harmony with each other. I think that another situation that arises in times like these is that we think we know what is the right thing. And we draw lines in the sand, and we get all entrenched in our view of things instead of having grace for other people's opinions and viewpoints. I really like what Greg said in the video that got sent over the weekend, that in times like these, there are no real right or wrong. It's a matter of reacting to situations like this with the best wisdom you can muster and making decisions based on that wisdom that you have with all the facts that you have available to you. And I would take it just one step further, and I would say also that we need to then respond with grace if others react to all of this in a different way than we do. Recognizing that the decisions that you make for you and your family may be completely different than the decisions that you or your neighbors or other people you know make, and to know that it's okay. This is a time when tensions rise, and we get stressed, and we get pushed to the brink, and when we do, we can fly off the handle pretty easily and create conflict where we don't have to. This is a time when we need to be able to understand and have grace for other people and the decisions that they're making. I mean, for instance, our daughter had a little party at our house on Friday night, and one of the girls that she invited couldn't come because her parents have made the decision that their family are not going out until after the 1st of April. And that's a pretty extreme situation, but I completely respect that and get it and understand it and support them in that. Even my wife and I, we don't agree on everything, and we have all these little, what I call Corona disputes about what we're going to do or not do and how we're going to handle it. But at the end of the day, we still love and respect each other and each other's opinions. The church here is going to be faced with making decisions in the coming weeks and even months on how we handle this. And it was a very difficult decision for us as a leadership team even to remain open this morning. And it's on a week-to-week basis. Our leadership team is going to meet right after second service today, and we're going to talk about what that looks like. And it's probably not an if we close, it's probably when, and when is the right choice to make and to shut down. And, you know, for some people, it's a no-brainer. It's like, hey, just do it right now. And, you know, and for others of us, you know, it's a really tough choice. I mean, for me as a pastor's kid, shutting down a church is a really big deal. Like, that's in me. I would just ask that you pray for us, because there may come a point in the not too distant future when, you know, everybody is pretty quarantined in our homes, and, you know, the streets are pretty bare. And I would ask that you pray that as we make those difficult decisions, that we would have great wisdom on what it is that we decide to do moving forward. But the bottom line is, I think that we just have to go forward with a lot of grace and understand that there are people who are going to think differently than us, and to walk humbly through this time and admit we don't know. And there are so many unknowns, but we will all do the best that we can. The fourth choice that we're going to be faced with is to choose gratitude over resentment. In verse 15, Paul says, and always, always, he stresses, be thankful. In spite of what's going on, I think that we can still be grateful. There is a tendency to get resentful that our lives are being disrupted and that things are getting out of control, but we can still be grateful for what we have. First and foremost, that we are really blessed to live in such an amazing country as the United States, that we have the medical advancements, the medical professionals who are really just well-trained and great, and we're very fortunate to have them. And I would just say there's a lot of first responders and medical professionals that are here in this church that are going to get stressed to the max over the next couple months, and we just need to pray for them and support them in any way that we can. We should also just be grateful for the fact that it appears that this pandemic looks to be short-term. It looks like in the long run, however many weeks or months that is, it looks like at the end of the day that we will more than likely recover and be able to go back to life as usual, which there are a lot of pandemics that have been projected that looked a lot worse than this, and so we can be grateful for that. But most of all, I think we should be grateful that whatever it is that we have to face down in the next period of time, that we have a God who has our back and that we can hold on tight to him. So, we have some choices that we're going to face, that we're going to have to make. And I think that if we can begin to pray about those choices now, even before we get to that point, that God would give us the wisdom to make the right choices, the right decisions, to have a positive impact, not only on our lives, but also on the lives of the people around us. We can go through this thing a lot stronger than I think we could if we were completely unprepared. It's in times like these that I think that we have to admit that we're not as strong as we think we are. You know, we talk about this all the time. We go out into the daily grind and, you know, we're building a life for ourselves, and, you know, what we're doing, you know, to accumulate wealth or financial or whatever it is, that it's a house of cards, that one day everything is going to come to an end. And so in moments like this, when we're faced with our own mortality, when we're faced with a crisis like this, we realize that we are not in control. And we finally have to admit that we need God. And when that happens, I think that God is able to finally get through to all of us. One of the positive things that comes out of a crisis like this is that our lives get disrupted to the point that it forces us to listen when we may not otherwise listen. It forces us to stay still and to pray and to ask God for wisdom and to look for God where we normally wouldn't look for God, and to develop this peace and strength that can only come from our faith in God, that you can't quite explain. And through it all, we can stay grateful that our faith can sustain us even in the darkest times. I love how the Apostle Paul ends this passage. He says, "And always be thankful," he said, "and sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs to God with thankful hearts." I think this is best summed up. I'm sure a lot of us have seen this video from Italy this last week. Italy has now become ground zero for the coronavirus, and social distancing is very real, and the streets are empty, and people are going stir crazy because they've been stuck in their apartments and houses for so long. And the incredible thing is there is this inner strength and desire to overcome. And so in the midst of the devastation and fear and anxiety that all of these people are facing, all of a sudden it's like this good old-fashioned Italian revival breaks out on the back porches and the alleyways of the homes and apartments across Italy. And it was this. Quite always on beat, but it's a beautiful display of inner strength and faith. And I would just pray that God would give us the strength to sing even in the darkest of times.